Tonight, we delve into the shadows where reality and the paranormal collide, bringing you true accounts from those who confront the unknown as part of their daily lives. First responders, the brave souls who rush towards danger when everyone else is running away, have stories that defy explanation and challenge our understanding of the world. From eerie encounters in abandoned buildings to unexplainable phenomena at the scenes of emergencies, these are not just tales to tell in the dark. They are experiences that have left even the most skeptical questioning what lies beyond the edge of our reality. Join us as we step into the unknown, guided by the first-hand accounts of those who have stared into the abyss and lived to tell the tale. Prepare yourself, for these stories are not for the faint of heart. The Brothers. My supervisor when I was a paramedic had 20 years in EMS and had a reputation for being a tough guy with a big heart. One day, he told us a story that raised the hair on the back of my neck and that I will never forget. At the time, he was an EMT farming community. In this town lived an elderly brother and sister along with an elderly cousin on a sprawling farm. They were very well liked by everyone in the town, and they would share a plot of their land to anyone who would ask as long as they followed one rule. No matter what they grew, they had to donate 1/3 of the harvest to food banks in the area. This was just one of the reasons they were so beloved. As they got older, Jenny, the sister, became frail and had difficulty moving around, so she was taken to a nursing home. James, her brother, was left to look after the farm. One day, the cousin who lived nearby was unable to reach James by phone and became concerned. He went to the farm and entered the house. He discovered James in an upstairs bedroom unconscious. He immediately called 911. The town's police and BLS ambulance raced to the farm. An ambulance from an adjoining community was also dispatched. My boss was one of the EMTs responding and knew this family. When he arrived, he said he walked into the house and was told to hurry as CPR on James was being performed. As he entered the front hall, on his left was a sitting room, and in the room, he noticed an elderly woman sitting in a rocking chair smiling back at him. He thought how happy and peaceful she looked and was a bit odd given what was going on. He then recognized her. It was Jenny. They get James to the ambulance and transported him to the hospital, where he was pronounced deceased on arrival. As my boss was filling out his report at the nurse's station, he made a comment to one of the staff about how sad that Jenny was well enough to go back home and then have James die like that. The staff member gave him a strange look and asked what he was talking about. My boss said how great Jenny looked at the house. He was then informed that Jenny passed away the day before at the nursing home and could not possibly been at the farm. Thinking he mistook someone else for Jenny, he asked around about who the female was at the house. There were no females during the call. All the responders were male. He then described what she was wearing, including big pearl necklace and a pink flowered dress to the staff, but no one seemed to know who she was. 2 days later, my boss and his wife decided to attend the wake for James and Jenny, double wake and funeral, since they were loved by everyone in the town. As my boss walked into the funeral home, he gazed over the coffin holding Jenny and nearly fainted, for there was she wearing her favorite pink flowered dress and big pearl necklace, exactly as she wore 2 days earlier at the farm. A break-in at the morgue. I am a police officer in one of the larger villages of Illinois. My partner and I were working night shift when we were called to investigate a suspected break-in at the local morgue. We arrived to find the custodian waiting for us out front. The custodian said that he'd been mopping one of the corridors and had seen something move in his peripheral vision. He looked up and saw a person quickly cross from one side of the hallway to the other. He couldn't describe the person much because it was dark. He'd been turning the lights off as he worked his way through the building. He said he saw just a dim outline, but enough to be sure of what he'd seen. He was unarmed, so called the police and stepped outside to wait. My partner and I entered the morgue. We started off by calling out to anyone who might be inside. No answer. Then began to do a sweep, walking down the central corridor with our hands on our guns, checking each room to the side. occasionally calling out for any intruder to show themselves. I came upon a room with the light off, pitch black inside. I fumbled for the switch and flicked it. The room lit up, nothing but an empty waiting room for relatives of the dead. I heard his partner call out, "Hey, stop. Turn around." I swung back out into the corridor and my partner had unholstered his gun and was pointing it at the end of the long corridor. He said, "She went around that corner." The custodian said, "She's trapped. No exits that way." We had the custodian lock himself in the waiting room for safety, then advance down the corridor, calling out to the woman to show herself, letting her know that we wouldn't hurt her. This time I reached the end first, and with my back to the wall, peered around the corner. The woman was standing by a big gray door. Lights were off here too, so it was hard to see her clearly. But I could see she wasn't holding a gun and had long, fair hair. I stepped out from behind the corner to talk to her, but she opened the door, disappeared into the dark inside, and shut it firmly behind her. I sprinted up to the door and pulled at the handle. Locked. Banged on it for a while and called out to her, but no answer. The door had a deadlock on it, so my partner brought over the custodian to unlock it. We turned on our flashlights to see better. The custodian rounded the corner and faltered a little. "This door, you sure? This door doesn't lock from the inside." The custodian found the right key and carefully turned it in the lock. Click. "We're coming in. Have your hands up." We entered the room, flashlights illuminating every corner. The custodian hit the light switch, and the room lit up. It was empty except for some equipment against the wall, and 2 gurneys in the middle of the room. One was empty, and one was covered in a sheet with what appeared to be a body underneath it. Nice hiding spot. I approached, and it was the smell that first hit me. It smelled like a corpse. I pulled the sheet down, and there the woman lay, straggly light brown hair all around her face. The tag on her toe said she died 4 days ago. I'm a devout Christian, and to this day, I don't know what to make of this event. The prankster reporter. My uncle was a deputy in a small town in New Mexico. He was the most hardcore person in our family, very serious, and didn't like jokes of pranks at all. So when he told this story and my aunt backed it up, we all believed it without question. The local reporter named Bob D. would always show up at any major police activity from the police scanner. Big car wrecks, fires, anything worth maybe reporting in the local paper. Everybody on the force knew Bob D. He was around at least once or twice a week at various police activities. Bob was a bit of a joker himself. He would mess with people by flicking behind their ears. People would react to the flicks thinking it was a bug only to turn around and see it was Bob joking around. Everybody liked Bob. Unfortunately, Bob had bad lung cancer and died suddenly. His wife buried him against his wishes because he wanted to be cremated. For the next couple of weeks after his funeral, people kept talking about seeing Bob at car wrecks, fires, all the same stuff he used to report on. There were 20 to 30 reports like this from civilians and members of the force. My uncle, of course, didn't buy it. Until the night he and my aunt showed up at our house, pale as paper. We asked him what the hell happened, and he had to sit down, take a breath, compose himself, and start to outline what happened. Note, this is a guy that I never saw get rattled by anything. He said my aunt and him were sitting on the couch in their house watching TV. My uncle kept scratching at his ear, over and over. Finally, my aunt asked him what the problem was, and he turned around just in time to see their bedroom door open. Bob D. is standing there in the doorway, clear as day. My uncle jumped up, cussed, or something, got my aunt's attention, who turned to see him there too. As soon as they both made eye contact with him, Bob smiled, turned, walked across the living room and out their front door, closed the door behind him, and was gone. My uncle controlled himself and ran outside, gun drawn, looking for Bob, but he was gone. At that point, they ran over to our place. We went over there and didn't see anything, but my aunt and uncle stayed at our place that night. At work the next day, all the guys on the force were giving my uncle lots of "we told you so." People around town said they saw Bob D. show up at police scenes for at least another 2/3 months. My dad saw him in our darkroom in our basement with a friend. He was flicking their ears in the dark. During the 3rd month, people that saw him kept saying he was looking worse and worse. My uncle saw him 2 more times, each time confirming he was looking more and more worn. My dad had concluded that he was decomposing, and his ghost was reflecting that process. Every time my ear itches, I get goosebumps. Invisible Dan, I'm a CMA, was working night shift in an Alzheimer's unit. All the residents were in and out with their lucidity. One lady seemed to be hallucinating, which were common for those residents. She insisted her husband was there, and she talked to him, scooted over so he could sit next to her, just generally acted like there was another person there when there wasn't. Her husband, Dan, had died a few years earlier. She seemed happy, and there's no point arguing with someone with dementia anyway, so we left them to visit. After a while, she quiets down and says Jim left. Across the hall, the lady in that room turns on her call light. Her complaint: "This man won't get out of my room. We don't see anything and ask, 'What man? Who is it?'" She turns to the nothingness beside her bed and says, "Who are you?" Then turns back to us and says, "His name is Dan." The hill. I was sitting at the bottom of a small hill in my unmarked car, monitoring the traffic on the highway ahead of me. It was around 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was completely dark out. The roads were shrouded in gloom, and the moon was only a thinly veiled crescent in the sky. Because of the long stretch of road, the whole highway was known for drivers going 15-20 miles per hour over the speed limit, so it was a good spot to hide out and flag down lawbreakers when they were least expecting it. Despite that, most officers at the precinct refused to patrol the area because of some rumors surrounding the same hill I was parked at. The area had something of a reputation among the locals, due to being a crime scene almost 26 years before. The body of a murder victim was discovered on the hill, but the case was never solved due to a lack of evidence and positive identification of the victim. Hyped up by the local media, no doubt, the area was long suspected of being haunted. People reported feeling nauseous or dizzy when hanging around the hill, and even the officers had bought into it, refusing to be stationed there. I didn't really believe in that kind of thing, so it didn't bother me when I was assigned this spot for traffic monitoring. As I was sitting there, keeping an eye on the horizon for any oncoming headlights, something drew my attention. A shadow had just passed across the back of my unit, coming around from the passenger side. I blinked a couple of times, clearing the haze from my eyes from staring into the distance for too long, wondering if I was seeing things. But then I saw the shadow cross over to the driver's side, moving across the front of the vehicle. Other than the pale glimmer of the moon, there were no lights on the highway. The road was shrouded completely in darkness, making it impossible to see if there was anything there that could have cast a shadow. That's when I heard footsteps too. It was only faint, but it sounded like grass crunching soft beneath someone's shoes, to the left of the vehicle. I squinted through the window, but I still couldn't see anything beyond the gloom. Thinking there was somebody outside the car, I started up the ignition and switched on my headlights, casting a dazzling glare across the grass in front of the car. With the whole area lit up, I looked out of each window to see who was out there. There was nobody. The shadow had been too large to be an animal, but there was nowhere out here for a person to hide. The hill was completely empty. I began to feel somewhat unsettled by the thought there might be someone out there, walking around my car. It must have just been my imagination that conjured those shadows, but somehow I felt convinced I wasn't alone. Shaking my head, I flicked off my headlights and settled back in my seat. I kept my hazard lights on, casting an eerie red glow around the car, just in case anything was out there. The road itself had gone unusually quiet. Although it was the early hours of the morning, there were usually still cars on the highway at this time, yet I could barely see the glimmer of a high beam in the distance. The wind began to pick up outside, making the unit rock slightly. The grasses on the hill began to sway, creating anomalies in the shadows. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the road, watching the horizon. Unease gnawed at my stomach. Something moved past the car, a shadow darting across my periphery. My heart jumped, and I reflexively switched the headlights back on, flooding the hill. There was nobody out there. No movement but for the wind rustling through the grass. I decided it was time to leave. There hadn't been a car driving past in some time, and I was starting to spook myself out. There wasn't much point in hanging around anyway, especially since my shift was coming to an end. As I set the car into motion and drove onto the highway, I flicked a glance up to the rear view mirror. For a moment, my blood went cold. It looked as though there was someone standing in the shadow of the hill, watching me drive away. I quickly dragged my eyes back to the road, scolding myself for being silly. I was letting those stories get to me. That was all. I didn't stop feeling uneasy until I reached the next town, where the streets were well lit, and there was more traffic on the road. It was then that something blinked on my dashboard, the security camera. I pulled over to the side of the road and took the camera down from its hook. It must have been recording since I hit my emergency lights, which meant if there had been someone out there on the hill, the camera would have caught it. I rewound the footage to where it began recording and hit play, my heart thumping with nervous anticipation. I hadn't imagined the shadow after all. The video clearly showed a figure walking around the car, starting from the passenger's side of the vehicle before moving around to the driver's side. Then, for about half a second after, the entire video went black. It was almost as though someone had put their finger over the lens, smudging the visual. After that, it went back to normal, and there was no longer a shadow in view. I wound the tape forward a few more minutes, but the shadowy figure didn't return. I set down the camera, unease settling in the pit of my stomach as I wondered what it could have been. The shadow had no visual features, nothing to suggest it was a person, but what else could it have been? I tried not to dwell on it as I drove back to the station. Maybe I just needed some rest, and the whole thing would seem silly in the morning. Nevertheless, the next time I was asked to go to the hill to monitor traffic, I refused. As we wrap up today's journey through the chilling corridors of true paranormal accounts shared by first responders, it's hard not to feel a shiver down our spines. The bravery of these individuals, not just in the face of danger, but also when confronted with the unexplainable, is truly remarkable. Their stories remind us that sometimes reality can be stranger and more mysterious than fiction. If these tales have intrigued you, sparked your curiosity, or even left you with more questions, we're right there with you. The world is full of mysteries waiting to be explored, and it seems we've barely scratched the surface. If you're eager for a part 2, let us know in the comments below. Your feedback is the beacon that guides our journey, and if there's enough interest, we'll venture once more into the scary stories from first responders. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Your support helps us uncover more stories and bring them into the light. Until next time, keep an open mind, stay safe, and remember, the truth is often stranger than fiction.